Okay, good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Professor Des Laubscher, Director of GDC, and Executive Dean Federico Fresche of UJ and Cumulus for the opportunity to speak this morning. It's an honor to be able to address colleagues across an international landscape of art and design, education, and I hope that my reflections this morning can add to our work over the course of the remaining 2 days of this conference. But my time is short, and so I'd like to get right to it. And so let me begin. I want to start by asking one question, and that is, how is adapting to and mitigating climate change designed for, with, and by the other 90%? And to answer this question, I will organize my comments into three categories because I believe that one needs to be working in all three of them at the same time to address this challenge. So the three categories that I want to talk about today: design education, in this case changes in pedagogy and context that require a rethinking of what constitutes the traditional notions of breadth and depth within design education, and the notions of core literacy within the disciplines themselves. So design education will be one of the themes. Designing with, of course, the theme of this conference, the other 90%. And here I want to focus on designing with as it relates to changes in practice, to focus on collaboration or co-design or service design with a focus on social innovation, and to suggest that this is not just about giving back, but literally a change in how we think about design practice itself. And finally, designing design for resilience, changing the criteria by which society and designers go about their work, remembering that we too, designers, are a part of society. We forget that sometimes. We set ourselves outside of it, and that changing the criteria for evaluating success in design itself beyond commercial viability alone, understanding that we can no longer externalize the work of design as it relates to the products of waste, that there is no out there. There simply is a continuous space. And so for shorthand, the three subjects we will discuss: education, collaboration, and resilience. Furthermore, I'll argue that these three, though each a subject worthy of independent and extensive discussion, are so intertwined as to be, in many cases, simply different sides of the same coin. And while three sides of the same coin might suggest the poverty of my metaphor, or a cheap magic trick, I would argue that the more we explore these themes, the more we unpack them, such that the through line of education translates to curriculum and pedagogy that is specific to the particular mix of globalization and localization that defines our time, that design practice that emerges from ways of seeing supported by education on the one hand and an altered context and opportunity set for design on the other, and the way a reframed practice alters the role and position of design itself as a social, political, and historical force in the context of system complexity, wicked problems, as your board chair, Ron Marcus, said last night. And keep in mind that climate change is the ultimate wicked problem. And so it is not solved in a traditional sense of design problem solution. Rather, it is engaged in order to change the shape of the problem and to make it more manageable. So the more we look at education, collaboration, and resilience, the more we realize we are exploring, like Calvino in Invisible Cities, a multivalent narrative of place, space, and meaning that is at its heart a way of seeing the same complex whole from many, many different perspectives. Further, I will argue that we are in a particular moment in history that is beyond the meta-narrative of modernism and beyond the fragmented histories of post-structuralism, and that we find ourselves in a time when complexity, interconnection, codependence, collaboration, and sharing define the meaning and the methodologies of our time. And so keep in your mind a coin with three sides. Or if you prefer, wander the streets of Venice like Marco Polo or Kubla Khan, as we explore these three interwoven narratives and themes: education, collaboration, and resilience. I'm curious to begin, though, by a show of hands. How many of those of you who live in the region or who arrived here by Friday — I didn't arrive until yesterday morning, so it doesn't count — but those of you who arrived here by Friday, how many participated in the People's Climate March action here in Johannesburg that occurred on Friday? Anybody? Not a one. Wow. This we have to change. On Saturday, while I was still at home in New York, I tried to get a sense of the scale and impact of the Johannesburg event. This was more than idle curiosity or more than a way to just start this talk off. Since the People's Climate March first emerged as an idea, we, and when I say we, I mean myself and many colleagues across Parsons and the New School, have been working with colleagues across a range of NGOs, policy groups, academic and cultural institutions, to help organize the New York City March. Student groups as well. In the end, there were more than 1,500 organizations that came together to organize the march in New York City, and so I was trying to understand the impact and the context of the marches in the other locations where major events were planned. These included London, which looked like this, Berlin, Bogota, Istanbul, Paris, Rio, Delhi, Melbourne, Johannesburg, though none of you went, Jakarta, Lagos, Amsterdam, and in New York, the estimates are that somewhere between 310,000 and 400,000 people marched in what many of us hope will be a tipping point of bodies on the street demanding change. And so I wore my shirt today in solidarity. You were wondering what I was wearing. So I've got my New School shirt. This is what they look like in the back, right? This is what we were doing, marching for climate justice. And these were some of my friends and colleagues from New School in the midst of that 400,000. I'm going to go with the higher number. Because, March organizers, we always like to take the higher number. The 400,000 people who marched for climate justice. And it was a pretty extraordinary event. Sorry, I just pushed the wrong one here. 2 computers. I'm going to leave this guy up for a little while. In part because he looks way better than I do in this shirt. And take a moment to provide some context for my reflections on the intersection of climate change as it relates to the themes we're discussing today: education, collaboration, and resilience. So let's focus in on education. I realize that for some of you, you know Parsons, but not the New School. Or you might know both, but didn't realize that Parsons was part of the New School. The New School I'm talking about is best known for its social science faculty. And while it was the home of Hannah Arendt, it was also the home of John Cage and Martha Graham. It was founded by John Dewey, Charles Beard, and Thurston Velbin, among others, in 1919 as a place of radical inquiry and lifelong learning, and became a haven for scholars fleeing Europe during the Second World War. Later, the New School would establish the Center for New York City Affairs out of the ashes of the near bankruptcy of New York City in the 1970s, early 1970s, and the fires of urban decay. Today, that center is part of the Milano School of International Affairs, Management, and Urban Policy at the New School, and is a key partner to Parsons in our work on cities and climate change. The New School has more recently been a meeting ground of scholars, policymakers, and designers seeking a cross-cultural dialogue among India, China, and the United States on issues of prosperity, innovation, and sustainable environments, to name just the 3 cohort sectors over the last 6 years who have been working in collaboration. Though all of this work is deeply relevant to design education today, even central to it, for many people, including many inside of Parsons, the New School is not connected to the long history of Parsons School of Design that itself is founded a generation before the New School in 1896. Also, it turns out, in a breakaway moment analogous to the New School's move toward a more modern and radical inquiry. In the case of Parsons, it was the Art Students League of New York that had become too conservative to support the emerging role of design in the United States and the rise of the industrial age. Parsons would emerge out of the league at the same time that design would become a partner to industry in the 20th century. Frank Alva Parsons was determined to put the school that would later bear his name at the forefront of that force. And so Parsons, Pratt, RISD, Cooper Union. In the United States, these schools would emerge in the 20th century, like the Bauhaus in Germany, as centers of design education deeply connected to the forces of industry, the rise of consumer culture, and the explosion of technology. And while these two histories, the New School and Parsons, were at times running in parallel and in times intersected, it was in 1970 that we formally joined forces under the umbrella of the New School, which today is a 10,000 student university best described by our commitment to excellence in design, social research, liberal arts, urban policy, planning, and performance. Parsons is at the center of this mix, with 5,000 of the 10,000 students studying art, design, or strategic design and management. And I would argue that this makes Parsons a most unusual design school in that it is large enough to be the biggest ACAD school in North America, with a comprehensive array of pre-college, undergraduate, graduate degrees across every field of art, design, and associated business, from the design of fashion to cities. But it is also part of the larger university with access to world-class social science, policy, planning, and performance. So the fact that our branding over the past 40 years has failed to have people associate the New School with Parsons or Parsons with the New School is a massive failure of branding. In fairness, we've only tried to do this for the last decade or so, but it's still a failure. But as an experiment in education, our first subject, it has proven an extraordinary success. As a place to develop the pedagogy and the cross-disciplinarity necessary to take these two schools whose founding is grounded in the enormity of the 20th century for better and worse, and there is more than a bit of both in that context, to a transition to a university in which, as a global leader at the intersection of design and social research, right at the moment when the questions facing society are the most complex and vexing and happen to reside at the very intersection of social forces and the human capacity to transform the material, cultural flows of the planet in ways that bend toward justice, equality, and ecological resilience, has been an enormous privilege and the most rewarding and stimulating work of the last 25 years for me personally, and I think for many of my colleagues in the faculty at Parsons. I mention this not merely to clarify why it is that it says the New School on my orange shirt, or to lament a failed effort in storytelling through branding, but because of what I am trying to say about education. And that it emerges from the particular mix that is the New School. And while many other places, like UJ and GDC, for example, and others, are also in a position to rethink the social, material, and spatial systems that humans have designed, and to design them to be more ecologically resilient and socially just, my view on it has been shaped through the lens of the New School in Parsons. And so I begin with the People's Climate March because it is the first thread of connectivity among the narratives of education, collaboration, and resilience. Collaboration, however, is a radical shift for design practice. Designing with or for the other 90%, and without wanting to spend all my time talking about those two words, with or for, let me just say that the with is a more familiar to the character and community of Parsons, and it has emerged in our partnership with the New School, but that there is also a place for the for in this, and it resides largely, I think, in the technology of the great energy transformation that will be part of the next 2 decades. But climate change disproportionately impacts those who have less access to mobility, food security, fresh water, sanitation, whose health is more fragile, or who, for reasons of age, gender, or social position, are at risk. It is essential that we figure out how to transition to less carbon-emitting energy sources rapidly in order to mitigate further damage and harm to this large community of people and to future generations, arguably the other 90%. It's also critical that we accelerate the design of adaptive systems to accommodate life in a world that will continue to be altered by climate change even after we have transformed from carbon-based fuels to renewables. This twin challenge of adaptation and mitigation is a design challenge, but it is also a social challenge. My friend and colleague Ezio Manzini, sitting down here in the second row, has a beautiful description of sustainable design, which he describes as learning to live better with less. I'm particularly enamored of Ezio's description because I think it is so much more elegant and better than anything we came up with back in the early 90s at Bill McDonough's office when I was project director for the Hanover Principles Design for Sustainability, which is the underlying text that was mentioned yesterday by Mervyn to Cradle to Cradle. That's the book that we wrote, or the text we wrote in 1991-92 that is the basis for Cradle to Cradle. And writing that work with Bill, Michael Braungart, and David Rothenberg, also an extraordinary experience, but it wasn't until I met Ezio years later that the simplicity and beauty of its definition put that work into context. That context is not only driven by ideas about social innovation, but has collaboration at its heart. Collaboration is radical because it displaces the designer from the position of sole author, a myth to begin with that emerges from the heroism of the 20th century and puts interconnection and codependence, sharing, and the ability to listen, to think differently, to accommodate and learn from difference at the center of design process and practice. But we should make no mistake, learning to live better with less, it's an extraordinarily, it's so simple, it's so beautiful because it characterizes both of these needs. We need to figure out how to learn better, and we need to figure out how to do that with less. It's an extraordinarily beautiful description. We should make no mistake, learning to do so will not be easy, and it requires both design change and social change. Mostly, I think it means changing the criteria by which we measure the success of any given design solution, be it a product, a system, or a service. It means we have to insist that designers take into account the consequences of their actions, as Des mentioned earlier this morning. We need to expand our notion of design and situate it historically. For design and human imagination and endeavor are constantly remaking the world. As a species, we prod and bend and transform the raw materials and the energy flows of the planet into the objects, spaces, and places of everyday life. We are makers of cities and homes and buildings and parks and cars and trains and planes and bicycles. We develop technologies and tools and networks that allow us to communicate across great distances and extend the capacity of our bodies, cyborg-like, to sense and comprehend the world around us. We're storytellers and explorers, at turns restless, rooted, innovative, cautious, and wildly creative. We define beauty and proportion and aesthetics in ways that when we are very good bring us together, but just as often drive us apart. Humans are designers capable of the most compassionate, farsighted, and joyful actions and of doing great harm. Design is not a neutral act. Design enables human action. It is purposeful and magnifies capacity. It reveals and conceals who we are, and while design has played a role in every epoch of human history, it has never been more important. In the 21st century, communities around the world are confronted with material, strategic, and interconnected challenges: food systems, fresh water resources, poverty, healthcare, energy efficiency, transportation infrastructure, and humanitarian aid, to mention just a few, and around which we have seen many projects in the first, and we will see in this today and tomorrow. Design alone will not solve these challenges, but neither will they be adequately engaged without the creativity and strategic thinking of designers, because we live in a designed world. I would argue that design is emergent. In many ways critical, in many critical ways, public awareness of design has never been greater. Design thinking is becoming highly regarded among business leaders, policymakers, and increasingly understood as adding significant value because of its capacity to frame problems and see solutions from a different perspective. As design evolves, it is as often concerned with conceiving and arranging systems as it is with creating beautiful and useful objects. Design is a generative and a regenerative endeavor with immediate impact and long-term implications. And while it has always been true, it has never been more important that designers focus their talents not simply on how things appear, but how things fundamentally are, and more to the point, how they could be. This combination of education and a reframing of collaboration is what we do and focus on at Parsons. The faculty and students there work every day to actualize this promise embedded within design practice. Whether they're studying, like many of you here and in your institutions, fine arts, fashion, photography, architecture, product or lighting design, illustration, interior or urban design, communication design, design and technology, integrated or transdisciplinary design, all things that we focus on at Parsons, the design of business or the business of design itself, the core questions of environment and sustainability. The students and faculty are continuously seeking to advance design and renew its relevance in the world. To do this work, we spent a good portion of the past decade redesigning the design school itself. My colleague and friend, Tim Marshall, who's the provost of the new school today, but was the dean before me at Parsons, was a driving force in the rethinking and the designing of the school. And together, we and our colleagues in the faculty, 3 of whom are here today, assuming they woke up in time, took the design school as a project itself. Today, Parsons is organized into 5 schools, having moved away from a departmental structure to explicitly support the crossover and the kind of work more associated with innovation and complexity, not to mention the nature of careers and practice today. These 5 schools, art, media, and technology, fashion, constructed environments, art and design, history and theory, and design strategies, structure specialization in given fields, and also enable interdisciplinarity and cross-school scholarship that affords designers the broad perspective they need in today's professional world. Additionally, the students benefit greatly from our location within the new school, as I mentioned earlier. Our students integrate their design education with courses in anthropology, political science, policy, music, drama, and much more. And so education and collaboration take this form at Parsons and at the new school. The third piece of this, though, of this trifecta is resilience. And this last bit requires a small amount of unpacking. Designing design for resilience is a rather clunky way of describing a contemporary framing of environmental design. Environmental design is a framework that situates the planning, production, and the evaluation of objects of every scale, including products, buildings, parks, human settlements, and infrastructure, in a reciprocal relationship with the functioning and resilience of natural systems. By explicitly extending the ethical and temporal considerations of design across generations and beyond the bounds of solely anthropocentric concern, environmental design has significantly altered certain design practices. It has inspired environmentally reflexive landscape architects, urban designers, architects, interior designers, industrial designers, fashion designers to consider the environmental cost of their work as a core metric in evaluating success. As a result, those practices are introducing the conservation of energy, natural resources, and materials into the design process and producing objects, spaces, and landscapes of increasing durability and long-term social flexibility. Environmental design, of course, had a history long before it had a name. In the broadest sense, all design is a transformation of the natural environment. Nature provides the raw material of design in the form of energy, chemicals, metals, wood, silica, water, etc. And natural landscapes are rearranged by the pattern and function of human settlements, and natural systems are mimicked, altered, supported, or obliterated by human activity. The degree to which nature is explicitly, however, a part of the design process is largely a function of a particular cultural significance of the term itself, a term environment or nature or other synonyms, sustainable, ecological. As the meaning of these adjectives changes over time, the meaning of environmental design changes too. Thus, environmental design acquires meaning and relevance in relation to the social and temporal significance of nature within a given culture at a given time. As a result, environmental design is integrally linked to the ethical and philosophical zeitgeist. Throughout history, people have defined themselves as made of, part of, outside of, and interconnected with nature. Each perspective influences how the objects and processes of design are mediated in relation to the level of human understanding and concern for the environment. With the formal introduction of the term ecology, back in 1866, the German biologist Ernst Haeckel gave a name to a set of emerging theories on the structure and the functioning of living organisms in relation to their surrounding natural context. Distinct from the more mechanistic and fragmentary view of nature that preceded it, ecology provided the basis from which to think more systematically and holistically about the environment. Ebenezer Howard's idealized Green City movement, 1898, blending the city into an integrated whole, can be seen as a design response to the emerging field of ecology. Similarly, the American naturalist tradition in the mid-19th and early 20th centuries, Emerson, Thoreau, Leopold, found expression in conservation movements and ethical frameworks that led to policy designs, as well as landscape and wildlife preservation in the form of national parks or the Forest Service. Leopold's land ethic formed the basis of the modern environmental movement, which was born in 1945 at the dawn of the nuclear age, and the new realities of the Cold War coupled with the Cold War, the new realities of the Cold War. Can we even say that today, as it seems to be re-emerging? Coupled with an emerging realization that humanity possessed the capacity to irrevocably alter the planet, led scientists such as Rachel Carson, Barry Commoner, and designers like Fuller, or writers like Stuart Brand toward policy action on the one hand and project-driven solutions on the other. Fuller's Spaceship Earth and Brand's Whole Earth catalog evidence the new global scale of environmental design. In 1987, the Brundtland Commission codified the term sustainable development, joining the use of natural resources and environmental protection to human need over time. Like ecology before it, sustainability presents a holistic view of the function and value of natural systems, but establishes human need as the baseline metric to evaluate success. Sustainable design strategies consider the full life cycle, as I mentioned earlier, of products and measure the embodied energy of processes or building components, and allows for an accounting of energy and material consumption as a measure of environmental cost. But environmental design within the paradigm of sustainability includes also the use of non-toxic, renewable raw materials, product recycling, and natural resource preservation, which brings us to today, in which ecosystems are seen as nonlinear and dynamic, best captured on the rubric of patch dynamics or resilience. This theory sees ecosystems as spatially heterogeneous, as flow structures. Environmental design in this context is deeply cross-disciplinary, actively engaging in research, public policy, and outreach, in addition to design solutions at the scale of landscapes, watersheds, infrastructure, and human settlements. In the end, focusing on resilience is not just of not just natural systems, but also of social systems. And so to bring this full circle, to address the wicked problem of climate change is to deeply engage in the work of design for, with, and by the other 90%. The challenges ahead of us can be seen through different lenses of education, collaboration, and resilience, but they are all pointing to what I think is the most exciting and optimistic observation, and that is that no matter how screwed up the world is, we designed it to be that way, and we can design it differently. We can account for the externalities and the contradictions within design, just like the motto of the People's Climate March said, to change everything we need everyone. These are heady times for design, but I do believe that we are indeed up to the task. Thank you.